Hey everybody, Liam Clisham here for another awesome Redshift tutorial. Today I'm going to talk to you about using a VDB animation inside of Redshift for Cinema 4D. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so now that we're inside Cinema 4D, let's go ahead and get moving with bringing a volume in. So to do that, we can either go down here where I've got mine docked and just hit Redshift Volume, and I'll bring in a volume object. If you don't have yours docked in any location like this, you can get all this through the Redshift menu up here, and you can just go into Objects and Redshift Volume. And once you get your volume placed, you're going to go to your path and find the volume. Go ahead and click on this. I've got a sequence since we're going to be working with an actual animation, and just hit no to copying that for now. And when we look at it, we don't actually get anything showing up, and that's just to keep things really lightweight, but you can turn on a preview. And so you can go to preview bounding box, which makes this a solid box, so you can just have it sitting in your scene, or you can have points. And this particular sequence begins at 1, so I'm going to go ahead and adjust this to start at frame 1. And if I were to scroll forward right now, we wouldn't get any other previews. And that's because I haven't told it that I want it to be an animation. So we'll do that in just a second, but I want to talk about some other information that came in with this file. So I'm going to go ahead and put our points up to 100 and then talk about these. So down here under information, we have our channels. And this is information that a VDB will carry out of Houdini or whatever volume software you're working with. So a lot of it is density, temperature, heat, velocity data, and what that carries is different things for different parts of the volume. So density often relates to smoke. Temperature is going to be like fire color a lot of times. Heat also, depending on the program, can be fire color. And then velocity up here will control our motion blur. So if we turn on motion blur, it's going to get all that information from here. So I'm going to go ahead and just plug that in really quick with X, Y, and Z. And later, if we turn on motion blur, you'll see that it will render out with some blur added to it. And next, I'm going to go into the animation tab and choose simple. Loop is going to do what you think. It's going to play all the way through. Once it gets to the final frame, it'll loop back. Ping pong, it'll ping pong back and forth. So once it gets to frame 90, it'll go all the way backwards to frame 1, then from 1 to 90 and back and forth. So we just need simple. And what we need to do is hit detect frames. And you'll see right there, it now has start frame is 1, end frame is 90. And you'll see that Redshift is trying to render this. I'm just going to go ahead and hit stop for a second and move into position. And the reason I'm hitting stop is VDBs can get a little bit heavy, for 1. And 2, I want to take the time to tell you about what happens if you move around a scene too quickly, if you have an animation, and also what happens if you use the timeline too quickly. So if I had this playing and I started to jump around, Redshift needs to recalculate this information every time we move through the timeline. And so you'll see I get a little circle each time I click, and that's just for our viewport. So imagine if we had this playing each time. If you aren't a patient person, try and learn to be patient with VDBs. I'm not saying that it's going to crash Redshift, but if you click around too quickly or you start moving around really, really fast, it can be a lot for not just your system to handle, but for Redshift to handle, and it can lock up and even crash. So take the time to move to the frame that you want to, take a pause, let it calculate, and then move again if you need to change frames. So you'll see now that we've got our animation loading and it's rendering accurately here. I'm going to jump to about frame 40. And this is just so we can start bringing in our material and getting stuff showing up in our render view. Because you'll see if I hit play right now, nothing's going to show up, even though I have this dome light. And that's because we don't have any kind of material attached to our volume. The light doesn't know what to render in this information here. So to get that, go to our materials, volume, and go ahead and throw this on the volume there. And we're still not going to get anything because we need to take some of this information here and plug it into our material. So I'm going to double click on that and bring up our material editor, and you'll see we have basic information right here. So in scatter, like I said in the beginning, it deals with smoke, and smoke is usually a scattered element. So we're going to go ahead and put density right there. And down here for emission, we're going to use the temperature to drive our color and emission. So you can see right there, we've already got our smoke coming in. If I was to play through, it would just show smoke. And as soon as I click off of temperature, it's going to start to emit where our fire and temperature is. We get this really hot glow. And that doesn't look anything like what we want. So we need to start tweaking some settings. So first off, to get our colors, I like to go in and go ahead and pipe in the colors of fire. So like a red, I'll click in here, drag this over, get our red, kind of something like that. Next up is usually a yellow. And as the fire gets hotter, it usually gets lighter. So I'm gonna actually go into RGB and make this a pure yellow. And then white will be there. And I'm gonna have just a really light blue in here. And you'll see we start to get some of our fire color in there. Let me close this out, and I'm gonna jump up to frame like 70. You'll see it takes a second to load. And now it's preparing volume objects. So you can see now why I gave you that warning, just to let it do its thing, let it think about all these dots of information, what it needs to do. And so as I move up, you can kind of see we get some weird voxelization. And part of that has to do with the quality I rendered this out at. I wanted it to be fast, so I didn't do a very high quality voxel render for this VDB. If you don't know what a voxel is, you can go on Wikipedia and look that up, or just hop in one of the motion design slacks and ask somebody. I don't want to get into it, but you can kind of think of it like a 3D pixel. So a 2D pixel is usually X and Y, and then a voxel is kind of like a three-dimensional pixel. It holds X, Y, and Z coordinate information. So that's why you get these little cubes. So to combat that, we need to go into our advanced attributes. I am going to use it here, but you can also get to it through here in your material editor under advanced. And so first I'm going to start working with the old min and max of density, and then we'll work on our emissions too. So I'm going to bring this down, see if that helps anything, and it's a little bit of playing a game. So you can see up here, it gets pretty sharp and clear, but if I bring this down here, it starts to do the inverse. It kind of doesn't add so much sharpness, but starts to feather that. So that's why I say it's kind of a game that you have to play with. And so it's not really adjusting our brightness because our density is with smoke. So let's see if we can just bring down our scattering and see if that helps with how bright this is. And it's kind of doing that a little bit. And then our absorption, if we bring this up, we'll start to bring in some more of our smoke. So now we're starting to bring out those details. And like I said, I didn't do a real high quality render with this. Sometimes you can just leave your absorption at 1 and it looks great. Sometimes you need to make some big adjustments. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this up to like 12. And really bring in some of this smoke detail again, and maybe bring up this scattering just a little bit in here. And then down here, like everything, there's always a ramp that you can work with. I'm gonna set this ramp to something like square. We'll just keep it nice and simple. And that's getting a little hot again, some areas. So I'm gonna delete these out and start to play with these a little bit. I think I'm gonna move this way some, kind of feather that out, maybe even bring this in some. That's starting to get a little too light. If we move this way a bit. And then now it's starting to clean up a little bit up in here, but we still get this weird voxelization down here. So I think we need to start playing with our emissions a bit. So you'll see down here, if I start to scale this back, our brightness really starts to calm down, but we also start to lose this voxel detail that's happening here. We can see that a lot of this voxel information is just coming from our temperature. So if I go down to say 0.05, we start to get the information that we want, but it's not nearly as bright. Especially in the beginning, when we have our big explosion, we need some of that information. When we get it around the sides here, and then as we pop forward, it's still going to have some of that information in there, but it's going to be a little too smoky. So we have to figure out a happy medium. So what we're going to do is probably leave this at like 0.1 and start to adjust our remap settings in here. So I'm going to go back up to, say, 50 again, so we can have some of the smoke up here, but a real good bit of explosion happening too. So we'll let that catch up. So the colors are looking pretty good. I can adjust those in a little bit, but I'm most concerned about the brightness. So maybe even like 0.25. There we go. You can start to see some of this voxelization happening. Maybe I need to go back up to 60 just to see where those cubes were happening again. And my experience working with Redshift is if you take the old mins and you start to bring them up, that's where you can really start to see more voxelization happening. So if I adjust this up, you can see this starts to get all jagged in there. If I do that down here, you'll see we very quickly lose some of the emission quality. But it also affects where our voxels were. So for density, it usually adds more voxels. It seems like for emission, it kind of takes them away. But it may be different depending on which program you render out of. So just remember, play with it a little bit, see what happens. I'm starting to like how this is coming together. We're starting to lose that voxelization in there. That's just remapping the old. You can remap the new. So what happens with the new is it takes the information that you've given it here and it applies new ratios to them for black and white. So if I look now, we still have a little bit of that voxelization. I'm going to bring this up just a little more, maybe like 0.125. I think we're starting to clear that out pretty well. And if I bring this back up, starting to look pretty good. We're starting to lose that voxelization a little bit in those areas that is really bothersome. And then in here, we don't really have any jagged, so it's looking pretty good. I'll just show you what the new max does. So you can see if I bring this back up, it's working with new ratios. And we start to get this voxelization again. So we can maybe bring this up again, bring this up in here, just try and find that ratio that really works best for us. And yeah, I think I'm kind of like in 0.15, 16. Let's try 0.135. It's looking pretty good. I think the only way I'm going to combat these little areas is just with a higher quality VDB render, but you can see all in here, these little wisps are looking really nice, and you can control all that when you export a VDB too. So let's go ahead and start bringing up our scatter a little bit more, see if we can make our smoke look a little bit more fluffy. Scatter is also going to affect how emissions scatter through the clouds, so the more of the coefficient you have, the brighter the scatter is going to be. So maybe like a 1.65, something like that. And we can play with the scale of our brightness again, so if you want like a really big bright blast, you can bring that up there, and I'm not even at 2 yet, and that's getting really bright, so let's try 1.25. It's still a little bright for me. I think it may just have to do with how hot this gets so quickly, so I'm going to start moving these around and adjusting how hot and how quickly that happens. So you can see this is our black, and as I move it up, it starts to eat away at the edges here. And I'm going to bring our red back a little bit. Maybe get some more oranges in here. And kind of bring our blue into there a little bit. So you can see very easily that we get a lot more hot areas just by sliding that. So as soon as I let go, that gets updated in there very quickly. I think I like that a little bit more. I think just to give it even more control, I'm going to throw an orange in here. Maybe a little bit closer to like a yellow-orange. That way I can really push this up into here. And that's starting to get where I want it. So it's getting too hot by adjusting that middle sector. Bring that up in there. And that's starting to look good. So let's start at the beginning, say like around frame 2, frame 3. See how this explosion looks from the beginning. And then we'll move forward. So just playing catch up right now. And as you saw, I clicked twice. I first started with 3 and then went to 2. So it's got to take a second to capture that information and then adjust back down to 2. So that's looking pretty good. It's pretty bright right in there. And then let's go up to say frame 20, see where we get with this. So we're getting some nice color coming through with our smoke in there. And if I jump up to frame 60, make sure we don't have any weird voxels, and then I'll jump up to frame 90 once this loads. And go to this here. Now something else I want to tell you too is make sure you have all your render settings set first. How it looks at all this information is going to be vastly different if you have, say, no global illumination on, or if you're only doing brute force, or if you're doing brute force and a cache. So let me just show you in here. I've got brute force on and an irradiance point cloud, and I've got my numbers turned up just as I usually render my stuff. So if I turn these off and we let it load again, you'll notice that this is going to change quite a bit. At least in my experience, it has. And you'll get a little bit different lighting values and hot and cold areas and things like that. So let me just jump to a new spot. So it looks like it's still doing a progressive render for the last load. So it's not too much different, but you can see like right in here, we have this like hot tail coming off in there. And then some of these areas that we started to calm down a little bit, get a little bit of voxelization in there where it felt like we had taken care of it. So I'm going to go ahead and put my settings back. You can see immediately that the light areas in here got a little bit more saturated when I turn on my brute force. I'll turn on my point cloud. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring in this material that I already made and just throw it on here to see the difference. So go like that. So you can see this one's a little bit darker. I've got a lot more black in here, and my coefficients aren't nearly as bright. I really like kind of like a darker cloud explosion going on, so that's what I did there. And if we come in here, you can see I really started to clamp my old max and my news, and then for shadow density, or not shadow density, just regular density. And then my emissions, I brought my old max up a bit, and then using that new ratio, I clamped it back down. So you can see very quickly, you can try and do look devs, and if I throw this one back on here, it gets really bright. So this one I brought it up a little bit again, just like I did in the other one, just not nearly as far. And these are pretty similar to what I had set up. And then of course you can just render out a sequence, and that's what I've got here. If I zoom back out, you can see this is from the test render that I did, and you get some really nice looking fire really quickly. All right, thanks everybody for watching. If you have any questions, definitely hit us up on Twitter, either at Brograph or at _531. Go check out brograph.com/Slack and hit up the new Slack channel. Hop in there and ask us questions too. Give us show topic ideas for tutorials, or if you're a podcast listener, they're always looking for new show topic ideas. And we will see you in a few days for our live stream. Thanks so much.
Brograph.com, an online resource for learning Cinema 4D, After Effects, and other motion graphics tools specifically catered to help you prevail as a motion graphic designer.
What's up, bros? Welcome to another Brograph motion graphics tutorial.
With tutorials, plugins, and now a podcast with tens of thousands of listeners worldwide.
Yeah, it's a great community to be part of.
We give you professional time-saving tips, industry news, interviews, shortcuts, and lessons that help keep you current in the world of motion design.
Go into HDR Studio, take the render settings, pick the HDR, put in a reflection, and gorgeous.
I love projects that scare me. When our art director comes to us and asks for something that I had never done before, man, it gets me pumped.
Our weekly long-form podcast will give you the latest news, help you in your file management, hardware configuration, and client relations. Learn about the latest render engines, modeling techniques, and workflow integration while staying entertained.
Real nice banana.
Ah, that's so funny. All right. I'm going to live forever.
Our Brograph Talks are a chance to see the way industry leaders from around the globe are changing the face of motion design.
Sometimes you got to make stuff that you're not going to put on your reel, and I'm not here to judge.
The podcasts and talks include people like Beeple, Barton Damer, Nick Campbell, Andrew Kramer, David Ariev, Chad Ashley, Paul Babb, EJ Hassenfrost, Mitch Myers, Chris Schmidt, Jules Urbach, Cornelius Dammert, David Brodeur, Andy Needham, Caitlin Kaju, Zubair Parker, Noseman, Ryan Bean, Casey Hupke, Nick Lyons, Sage, Joey Korenman, Jeremy Cox, Rick Barrett, John Dickinson, Matthias Omatola, Patrick Goski, Brandon Clements, Steve Teeple, Tom Glimpse, Patrick Longstream, Julia Simone, Devin Coe, Al Heck, and even Deadmau5.
You get that render done. Yeah, you better frame what?
Our Brograph breakdowns go behind the projects and give you an insight on what it's like to manage and maintain your own personal business or work for a large company. Join us for live sessions, check out our useful plugins, watch time-lapse projects, interact with us, and send us email questions and topic ideas. Or just hit the Rando Render button and do an imaginative daily that'll keep you on your toes.
Take all your dreams and let's do it!
Subscribe today and get automatic updates on the latest tutorials, tricks, tips, and inspiration brought to you by industry professionals Dave Koss and Matt Milstead.
We don't care how you get here, folks. Just get here.
Subscribe now to Brograph Tutorials. It's pretty good, I guess.